Right now, we continue our coverage of President Trump's federal takeover of D.C. We told you earlier that in the 2 weeks since the takeover started, more than 2,200 National Guard members are now stationed in the city. And joining us right now to discuss the latest developments is Dr. Brianna Gray. She is assistant professor in the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland. Good morning to you. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Good morning. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So we've seen these additional states joining the takeover, the president coming out to meet with police and troops. Tell us what that decision accomplished for President Trump.
Well, I think one of the things we should first start to look at is the history of DC and how it sort of was created as this neutral territory that's now being weaponized for federal purposes. We're looking at a number of competing authorities, including constitutional authorities, that President Donald Trump has been able to utilize in his favor. We've seen precedent in 2020 where this has happened, where DC troops have been federalized in response to the murder of George Floyd. And so I think the precedent is sort of, continuing in this case. And I certainly think it's beneficial to the Trump administration for future purposes.
Yeah, we see Mayor Bowser pushing back, but the president saying that he may even extend this takeover. If that would happen, how long could something like that last?
Well, we have some precedent in the President Clinton's administration in 1995 when he sort of created this control board in response to a fiscal crisis in Washington, D.C. And it allowed for the federal government to sort of oversee fiscal operations until we saw sort of a change in the current state of DC federal financial operations. So we don't necessarily have a constraint in time that's been set by precedent, but we do see that it's happened in the past where a president has deemed something either criminally offensive or fiscally offensive that would warrant the federal government to sort of assume power.
So opened a federal probe into MPD's crime reporting. What's the potential impact here on the department itself and on Mayor Bowser, who is defending DC's crime stats?
Yeah, I think it's very complicated the way that government agencies tend to come up with their statistics. So I definitely think that that's something that warrants a conversation between MPD and some of the federal authorities who are looking at their stats, because there as a political scientist, there are various ways that we can collect our data and report our data. So it may be some conflation of measurements here. I won't get into that because I'm not focusing on that today, but I do think that this can create really serious challenges for the federal and local governments in trying to decide, how are we going to measure progress here? Because the premise of federalization is under the auspices that there's a severe crime epidemic. And so if we're not using the right reporting requirements or right reporting mechanisms, then we won't have sort of a standard for improvement.
And the president now says he is also planning on moving forward with his plans to beautify the city. He has announced his intention to raise about $2 billion from Congress. How are lawmakers responding to this?
Yeah, I think that's tough as well. We know that about between 20 and 30% of DC's budget comes from the federal government for things like this, for beautification, for affordable housing, for Medicaid, TANF, temporary assistance for needy families. So we do, we do have some serious considerations to make here when we're working with the federal government. I think DC lawmakers may tread lightly around this issue, partially because of the fact that almost a third of their budget comes from federal government funds. I do think we'll see some pushback around how those funds will be allocated. But I think generally there's going to be a light treading around the precedent that's been set here in 2020, the responsibility of the federal government to provide the assistance that it's promised in non-discretionary funds. So these are mandatory funds. Medicaid and TANF are mandatory federal funds. But I do think DC lawmakers will be in a really tough position in terms of working with the federal government in this way.
All right, it is a lot to keep track of, and we will be watching the developments closely. Dr. Brianna Gray, assistant professor in the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.